couple of weeks ago, I made a video looking at the most recent wave of Marvel Legends Spider-Man retro figures. Now, this line is a nostalgic nod back to the 1990s, and in particular, the Spider-Man animated series. Of course, back in those days, Toy Biz produced a line of action figures to support the very popular cartoon, and now, 30 years later, Hasbro is tipping their hat back to those days by releasing new figures in the style, and certainly in the packaging of those Toy Biz figures. In between the first and second waves of that retro line, they released a number of special one-off releases, and one of them was this special Deluxe Kingpin figure. Now, the eagle-eyed amongst you will immediately recognise that this is a repaint of the Kingpin Build-A-Figure wave from a few years previous. So for anyone who missed out on building that figure, perhaps they didn't get all the figures in the wave, perhaps there was a couple of figures that proved to be pretty elusive, and there were a couple in here that were quite tricky to get hold of, Red Goblin for example was one of those, you essentially have a second chance to pick up the Kingpin. And yes, delivery is a little bit different this time, but I actually think for collectors like myself, this is a definite plus in the new release's favour. Something else that stands in this release's favour is, of course, he isn't a Build-A-Figure, he is complete, and so you have the option to either pick him up if you want him, or disregard him if you don't, which I'm a huge fan of. Yes, he costs a little bit more than your standard Marvel Legends release, but significantly less than it would cost to, say, buy 6 figures to build him. For me personally, I'm a huge fan of this model. This is a lot more collector friendly, and I think in the long run offers much better value for money. So without further ado, let's dive into the review, shall we? First off, looking at the packaging, of course, you will immediately recognise that this is retro packaging. This is harking back to those Toy Biz releases all those years ago. And as you can see, the packaging is more or less identical to that original release. Now, for anyone who collected these figures as I did back in the day, this is bound to bring back very happy memories. And yes, having this scaled up to a larger than life size is really fun. I was a huge fan of this packaging as a kid. I love it now. I still think it's really bright, it's really colourful. I love the cityscape in the background. I love the use of the colours, the purple and the orange on the billboard, that logo, and it's really nice to see that image of the Kingpin recycled on the billboard there. I think they've done a really nice job of recreating the feeling and vibe of the animated series and of this toy line in particular. On the reverse of this oversized card packaging, we have another image of the Kingpin in the top right hand corner that's been recycled from the front of the box. We have a little bit of information about the Kingpin, and then at the bottom we have this rather fun lineup of the first wave of figures from the retro line, and this is really nice. Again, this is definitely keeping in spirit of the kind of lineup that we would have on the back of the packaging back in the 90s. Now, for those of you who didn't build the Kingpin first time around, let me say he is quite a big, sizable figure. Of course, he was a Build-A-Figure, and he's a decent weight as well. So straight away, you feel like you're getting plenty of bang for your buck. Now, in terms of head sculpt, I think they've done a pretty nice job. This is definitely recognisable as the Kingpin, but is he recognisable as the animated series Kingpin? Probably not so much. And herein lies one of the problems I have with this retro line. They've done such an excellent job of recreating the packaging very closely resembling what we had 30 years ago, and yet the figure releases that they've chosen to go for, their designs are somewhere in between the animated series and the comic book counterparts. I suppose they're trying to appeal to everyone, both the nostalgia collector and a more younger audience. So it ultimately feels like it's neither one thing nor the other. And I think it's a shame, because I wish they would just go full pelt and just try to recreate what we saw in the animated series and have a dedicated line to just making figures of the characters as they appear in the animated series. But as we can see here, the mould is very nice. Obviously a very different colouring to what we saw on the original Kingpin release. Of course, he has that bright orange waistcoat and the very welcome addition of that cravat. But sadly, the cravat is the wrong colour for the animated series. Of course, he wore a purple cravat in the animated series and a black waistcoat. So again, it's all there in terms of the sculpting, but the colours just make it a little bit incongruous with what we saw in the TV show. But nevertheless, that doesn't detract from the fact that this is a very nice sculpt and serves him very well. He only comes with the one pair of hands, but they work very well. He has the open hand for gripping, and then of course he has his closed fist, and on the closed fist of course we also have that fantastic ring that's very brightly coloured and looks really good. Now, for anyone who's been collecting some of the more recent Builder-Figures from the Marvel Legends line, including Mr. Hyde or the Joe Fix-It Hulk, you will recognise these legs and shoes. They're pretty solid, they're nice, big and chunky. The only criticism I have of the legs is the fact that we have that unseemly line at the knees there, which, yeah, definitely spoils the visual quality of them a little bit. And then, of course, the shoes themselves are nicely done. They're nice sculpt, but there's not a lot of detail on them when it comes to paint applications. They're just rendered in that flat, matte black colour, which I think works fine, but it would have been nice if they painted in the shoelaces, for example. So how does he fare in terms of articulation? Well, to begin with, he does have a ball joint in the head, so he can spin his head right the way around if you want him to. You will get a little bit of resistance the further to the side you go, but it's pretty solid. He also has a hinge there, so that means he can lift his head up a really good distance, although he can't really look down because of the sculpting, and of course the addition of the cravat there is definitely going to block that. He does have ball jointed shoulders, so he can lift his arms up and out a really healthy distance, which is fantastic. There's a pin swivel at the elbow, so he can rotate his lower arm 360 degrees, and he can bend it to almost 90 degrees as well. There's another pin swivel at the wrist, so again, that wrist can rotate right the way around, and of course it hinges in and out. Now, it doesn't hinge in all the way because there is a little bit of resistance from the cuff there, so something to watch out for, but pretty good otherwise. Now, he does have some upper ab articulation in the chest there, another ball joint, so he can tilt from side to side, he can move from side to side, and he can sort of lean forwards and backwards a little bit. At the legs, he does have a ball joint in the hip, so he can kick his legs out. This is complemented by a upper thigh swivel, and of course his legs can kick forwards and backwards, and then there's another pin swivel at the knee, so again he can rotate his lower leg from side to side and bend it to almost 90 degrees, but not all the way there. And then finally there is a little bit of ankle articulation. There's not a lot of give in this, to be honest. It can sort of gently rock forwards and backwards and kind of to the side, but there's not really a huge range of motion here at all. In terms of accessories, surprisingly he doesn't come with an awful lot. He comes with his cane and an alternate head. Now, you're not getting anything extra here because the original BAF also came with these accessories. The only slight tweak is that on this extra head there's actually some battle damage, so we can see that black eye there and the cut on the face, which I do think is pretty fantastic. So for anyone who's ever wants to have a battle damaged or battle hardened Kingpin fighting either Daredevil or Spider-Man, then this is the head you're probably going to want to put him in. So I think you could have plenty of really fun dioramas created using this head and definitely create that sense of battle, which is really fun and kind of unique. And for the sake of a scale comparison, here he is standing next to your standard Marvel Legends Spider-Man release. I really like this scaling. I think this looks really appropriate. I always feel like the Kingpin should be this bigger, larger-than-life character, and he should really tower over characters like Spider-Man and Daredevil. He certainly has the shape and size, and I think this is pretty appropriate, and it looks really good. And for long-term collectors, here's how he compares to the Face-Off Kingpin from Toy Biz. I used to love this particular version of the Kingpin, but I think looking at the two here, this new release definitely has better dimensions, although to be fair to the Toy Biz version, I think the colouring is much more accurate to the animated series, funnily enough. And in terms of scale, well yes, this new release obviously towers above the previous release, so he certainly has much more presence on display. So, final thoughts. For me, I actually got to give this 5 stars. Whilst I do have a few little gripes and niggles, there's nothing really about the figure at fault. I would like them to maybe change the colour scheme a little bit and maybe change the head sculpt so it's more reflective of the animated series, but the figure itself is top notch and I think they've done a really nice job of it. I also feel that this release is much more colourful than the previous BAF. I think we have that fantastic extra head with the battle damage, which is offering something new for collectors, and overall I think this works very, very well. It has great articulation, very nice visual appeal, and all in all works very well in the collection, so I can't really ask for more than that. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.